Hello, Acsense and Carahsoft would like to welcome you to our webinar, Simplifying IAM Changes, Acsense Configuration Management. To tell you a little bit about Carahsoft, we are the trusted government IT solutions provider supporting federal, state, local government, education, healthcare, and private sector industries. We connect our customers across the US and Canada with thousands of technology vendors, resellers, systems integrators, and managed service providers to deliver a comprehensive range of solutions and services to meet organizations' needs. Carahsoft, in conjunction with our vendor partners, is pleased to host and sponsor thousands of educational and informational events each year, ranging from webinars like today's to accredited trainings, trade shows, roundtable discussions, technology forums, users groups, and more. As the master government aggregator for our vendor, reseller, and integrator partners, Carahsoft has assembled a comprehensive IT solutions portfolio that includes products and services across multiple technology verticals to support organizations with mission-focused solutions. Participants of today's event are eligible to earn one continuing professional education or CPE credit. In order to qualify for the credit, you must be actively listening as well as answering any polling questions that will be presented. If you meet all the requirements, you will receive your certificate of completion via email in the following weeks. For more information on the CPE credits we are offering, our CPE sponsor NASBA, and the submission process, please visit the event registration page or follow the link displayed on your screen. If you have any questions after the session, please reach out to Sean Amadick, our Acsense representative at Carahsoft. Acsense is an identity and access management resilient platform designed to help enterprises maintain business continuity when identity systems fail. IAM is Tier 0 infrastructure, governing access to applications, data, employees, customers, and partners. When identity fails, business operations stop. Configuration errors, unsafe changes, malicious activity, or administrative mistakes can instantly disrupt access, even when the underlying identity provider remains operational. Acsense enables organizations to continuously capture and manage identity configuration state across directories, policies, applications, and administrative controls. This provides teams with clear visibility into what has changed, when it changed, and how it impacts operational readiness, establishing a trusted baseline for recovery and investigation. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers for today. Tom Blinder, Head of Customer Success at Acsense, Barry Gordon, Principal Sales Engineer at Acsense, Muli Matola, Co-founder and CEO of Acsense, and Drew Michaelgard, Executive Director of Federal Programs at Carahsoft. Muli, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Muli. And hi, everybody. Happy to have you here. Welcome to today's panel briefing. As we all know, as public sector IT leaders, your mandate is to make sure that protecting our citizens, make sure that systems are maintained as and publicly trusted. We secure our perimeter with identity and access management systems. But here is the critical vulnerability. Our identity and access management systems are as strong as the configuration management supporting them. And when agency systems drift from their secure perimeter and secure posture, the quality create massive blind spots. Just look at what happened last January and the state DHS failure in Illinois and Minnesota, where simple identity configuration drift and over-permission access expose the benefits data of nearly 1 million citizens. Such events directly undermine IAM framework and threaten compliance. Let's dive right into the discussion and understand more around configuration management and meet our panelists. And I'd like to start with you, Barry. Can you give us a rough explanation of what is configuration management and why it's so important?
Thanks, Muli. Sure. So configuration management is the operational discipline of using governed, auditable, and traceable workflows to control the configurations, roles, and rules within an agency's identity environments. This is to ensure security, compliance, and rapid recovery. Configuration management is a life cycle. So it'll start with some change in the organization that prompts a change in the desired state and configuration of the IAM system. From there, steps of testing the change, deployment, and verification and compliance occur to reduce the risk that these changes may introduce. By implementing and practicing these disciplines, the risk posed by configuration changes can be greatly reduced.
Thank you, Barry. So configuration management is a process, and I'd like to ask maybe one of our other panelists, Tom, maybe to bring from your experience.
Hey, sure. So I give you my view from the field. And as I see it, most organizations today treat their identity stack like a live fire zone, which means that all the engineers and admins, they make changes directly to their production environment. And yeah, some organization have a preview or dev environment that they think they're safe with it, because once back in the day, it was an exact replica of production. But with the years, an admin took just a small change here and a tiny tweak there. And with time, these environments drift completely apart. So they might look similar, but they're sure not identical. And a true configuration management means that your team gets a sandbox, which is an exact replica of your production environment. And in this safe zone, you can script, you can test, break, and you can always be sure that you can revert to the last safe point in time. So you can play with it, and only when you get the expected results, promote them to production.
Thanks, Tom. I'd like to ask maybe the audience whether your teams have a good process in place in making sure that your pre-production environments resembles production. And while our audience can enjoy responding to the poll, I might move to you, Drew. Configuration management might be a boring thing to do, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, so as far as configure management inside of agencies, and before joining Carahsoft and leading our federal programs, I was inside both Department of Veterans Affairs and the Executive Office of the President over at the White House, and we spent a lot of time reviewing, unfortunately, like after good configuration management wasn't done, and like the important thing was always like to think about it early, to bring in the business line that was trying to either deliver the benefit or trying to understand what process and flows were in place, as well as the security teams and the IT teams and the risk teams, because having all of them in the room, they could talk about like who did they want to get the benefits, and more importantly, and oftentimes just as importantly, like who did they not want to have access to certain benefits, because you're working both sides of that problem. And we were always surprised at how how important and those conversations were in determining criticality of the system. Some systems, if it's PII or PHI, you want to ensure like a higher level of security, or if there's an outage in a system that has to be up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Those are other factors that are important and make it more complex. And then, the other thing that makes it just really complex with config management is you have both contractors, government people, internal and outside teams that are all doing admin stuff. And well, most admins, are even great admins, are looking inside their environment, making sure that like all of the rules and authorization and authentication are in place, and those pathways. Very rarely do they think about other admins unless they're all brought together. And so when but my thing would be like everybody needs to think about it all the time. But in the agencies, it really is those key business lines and security people.
Amazing how important is planning. Maybe Pareto law, 80% planning, 20% doing. In this case, is critical. Maybe Tom, you can elaborate more. Who usually needs configuration management? Who owns it in the organizations?
Yeah, I love this question. And if you have to remember one thing that I'm saying today, this is the thing that you need to remember. So when we talk about who needs it, I think the most important thing is to understand the shared responsibility model. So tier one identity vendors, like I believe the one that you use, they guarantee their infrastructure, their cloud infrastructure is up and running and physically secured, but you own everything inside it. You own the configuration, the security settings, the applications, the roles, the groups, all the objects in it, you're responsible to that. And in case of external hacking, that someone just completely wiped out your environment or changed some objects or maybe locked out your admins out of the tenant so they cannot log in anymore. This is your entire responsibility. And if it's if this is one of the engineers that worked on the environment and made a mistake, mistakes happens. The vendor will not fix it for you. It's your responsibility. So if you manage complex environment with thousands of moving pieces in it, and you cannot rely on manual tracking, the ownership of changes requires proper processes and the tools, and you need to have the tools to help you do that.
So the shared responsibility model is a critical point to understand as an organization, because it defines the use cases that you actually need to protect against, or what is your side of the responsibility. We saw and we discussed some operational issues that may occur, like misconfiguration. But earlier we also mentioned a couple of incidents where configuration drift caused security breaches. So maybe let's double click on the security aspect of it. Why is identity configuration now considered a major operational risk for federal agencies? Maybe Drew, you can give us from your insights.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple reasons for that, Muli. And I would just go back to what Tom said about that shared responsibility model. I think there was when agencies were building their own systems, they knew that they were responsible for information configurations and all of the rules for their tenants because they built the full stack. And I think as we move to cloud and SaaS, especially SaaS, where you can bring a lot of different solutions together, we probably drifted a little bit to because we put the responsibility of, the delivering software on like new features, bugs, all of those things were handled by the SaaS providers, and we just became users. Like identity was in that kind of middle ground where it wasn't clear, whose responsibility it was, and the identity provider or the SaaS providers were providing all of the tools for the configuration. And then a lot of times your identity provider is totally separate than any of those, so you have to integrate them. But depending on, you've got this one group that's managing the identity, ensuring that that the people that are signing in are actually who they are. And then you have all of these different ways of dealing with like magnitude of risk, mission impact, fragility, reality. And Tom highlighted a couple of these, but when you've got a major system, and it could just be thousands of government employees. We have, very large agencies that are bigger than Fortune 500 companies, oftentimes nationwide. Or you think of like Department of State, which is global. You've got also a lot of users, and we want users to have as much access as possible to citizens, but we also work with businesses and non-for-profits. And so keeping all of those tenants and those IAM configurations is a huge challenge. I would say that, in my experience, and we didn't, a lot of that configuration was handled by contractors and a lot of our operations. There wasn't as many. We didn't have as many great people working inside the government, great technologists as we would. So just a quick plug, if you're an awesome technologist, please go work inside the federal government. They need more. But the reality is that when you have multiple different contractors working in different systems, just a higher chance of misconfiguration. And this isn't even malice intent. This just happens, like you were talking about, with drift, or Tom was talking about, like mistakes happen. like that you're trying to think of everything, but you can't always think your way through every problem. And then, like just a couple of things is every one of these, and just two of them, every one of these misconfigurations has an impact, on citizen-facing portals, on internal systems that the actual government employees are trying to use. And so when you have when there is disruption of service or the system's unavailable, these are essential services that people depend on every day and they go down. The other thing is at the scale that most of these agencies are operating at, if you have millions of transactions, even if just a couple of them go wrong, that's still tens of thousands, a couple of percentage points or tenth of percentage points on millions of transactions is still tens of thousands of people. So, back to kind of just that reality of like the misconfigurations are more frequent causes now of errors than what we're seeing on the provider side infrastructure. So I used to run systems and I would get calls and they're like, your system's down. And we'd look into it and it's like, no, the system is up and running. The users can't access it through misconfiguration or some sort of something usually associated with that. But it didn't matter because to them the whole system was down. So it is absolutely a critical area to be focused on.
So you said it well, Drew. Identity and access management system is a different beast in the infrastructure. It does not hold data, but it holds a lot of complexity within, which connect everything and everybody to everything. Barry, what is the strategic risk that such a system may possess?
Yeah, I think there's some strategic risk inherent in the fact that identity, like you said, identity and access management systems are connected to everything, and changes to identity and access management systems often have lots of downstream effects. So even simple changes like integrating a new application into the identity system, all the way up to really complex scenarios like an agency restructuring or a system migration, that can pose a lot of risk, right? A simple misconfiguration can cascade and create this huge blast radius. So by having good disciplines and controls around configuration management in place, an agency can reduce a lot of that risk.
Tom, we've seen a lot of disruption lately in the market, coming not from humans doing configurations, but coming from now non-human identities and AI bots. What is your take around the risk that this thing may possess on the infrastructure now?
I need to answer this question. We need to look at the operational risk here. And I see a change in the last year that caused by like an old security culture to a new modern reality. With the years, identity stack became very complex and cumbersome, right? With many moving parts in it and very fragile. And I see that that organization developed culture for risk avoidance. They say, if it worked, don't touch it, don't break. But it cannot happen today. It doesn't work today anymore because we have the bots, we have the system, the automated system, AI tools that constantly make changes, and we cannot avoid these changes anymore. So, and again, and while humans have this urgency or worry about breaking stuff, and they know the sensitivity of applications and the access to these applications, so they can check again what they want to do and verify before actually take the actions. Bots don't have this urgency. They don't worry about changing, so they constantly make changes. And so I think that what is needed here is total visibility around the automated blast radius rather than keeping it safe and not changing it.
Cool. So maybe a question for our audience. How are you adapting to this change with non-human identities sprawl? So while we're answering the question that Molly introduced, I would like to ask our panel as a continuous question. uh, talking about or speaking about the recent events changed and whether the IAM becoming a primary attack vector today. We see for the past 2 years surveys saying that more than 90% of the breaches actually involved identity and access management systems. My question is, how have those recent events changed agencies' approach to IAM configuration management? Tom?
Yeah, so I think so today, under modern zero trust, things have changed a bit. So if before we manage permissions and access through all kinds of security tools, now everything sums up to identities. Identities control the access to applications and the permissions inside the applications, and your identity becomes a single point of failure. So if the identity system breaks, employees cannot log in and cannot work, and citizens cannot access essential services. So today, government agencies have to treat their identities as mission-critical infrastructure.
Drew, Barry, what's your comments around that?
Yeah, I would just add a couple. One is there's, as more AI is being, and the federal government has become a huge adopter of AI for all sorts of reasons. One is there's just a lot of workflows that can be easily replaced with AI and very much improve the customer experience. And those are all positives. I do think, one of the challenges that we're seeing is how do you ensure that as you're adding in those new workflows and to what Tom said, like that you're ensuring the configuration and the AI is not stepping outside the bounds of what you want it to do. I think the other thing that we're seeing more of is while we treat them as they are non-human, we still treat them as a user. So they do need an identity, they do need authentication and authorization, and they do need to be tracked. And so that is it's a little bit different way of thinking about building the systems that you are when some of your users are human and some of your users are not human. Like, how do you ensure that both of them are getting access to and Tom said this about zero trust. You only want them access to the information at the time you want and for a duration that you want them. And so there is a lot of thinking around that.
And I think, Drew, reiterate on what you're saying, maybe the fear is around rogue AI agents or agents going rogue, and the magnitude of damage that they may possess. Barry?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One is we touched on a couple things. One being incidents, like you mentioned earlier, about where non-public information gets accessible because of misconfiguration or different incidents, different things like fraudulent actors. But then on the AI side, we're also seeing some unique challenges with that. One, AI agents are being used to automate some IAM related tasks, and they may be day-to-day changes, but the AI agent doesn't necessarily have the whole scope. So when it goes to make that change, it can cause unintended changes that might knock you out of compliance or violate some sort of policy just because the agent didn't fully understand the scope of the changes it was making. And then the other that we see with AI agents specifically is in the rush to implement AI agents, they might be granted a larger scope of access than they actually need to do whatever task it is. And this can lead to a lot of unintended changes. In best case, you're not keeping true to least privilege. And in worst case, this could be destructive, unintended changes caused by those agents with too much access.
That's so true. I had a meeting with a Fortune 20 customer several weeks ago. Before the new Acsense, they were trying to actually build a disaster recovery tool for their identity and access management stack. And the way that they're trying to implement is by using agents, practically adding 2 agents on two different infrastructures of IAM and letting them control the process of identifying the configuration on one side, copying them to another side, and the users, and trying to migrate also applications, which is, as he told me, it was an amazing experience. However, he just realized how much permission these agents require, and in order to provide all these changes, and having these trials and errors that might in the past be kind of forgiven if it's done on controlled scripts or API, and now the risk is the bots are quite autonomous, and they might misinterpret some of the action that you give, and the level of access that you give them is the level of blast radius that you create to your organization today. And I think that you all touched these points. Um, so maybe a little bit, Barry, from your side, I want to touch on some configuration management, which are non-common, maybe not the daily ones. Where do you see configuration management happen, and other aspects of the organizations?
So
Just
you're saying within
the
the
use
organizations
cases.
themselves, the use cases, yeah, we're seeing them. Of course, there's, as you mentioned, the day to day, changes that happen, but we're also seeing them when you have major changes, right? There's some sort of restructuring, or you're migrating from one system to another. You can leverage a lot of those tools to make sure that in a migration, for example, that uh, all those complex relationships that are tied to identities, as you migrate the identities and migrate users, things like that, relationships are maintained, which is going to minimize or eliminate any downtime during cutover. And you can also do things like make sure that things stay in compliance, right? You're not that the policies that should be applied across all the systems during a migration or during a restructuring are maintained, they're healthy, you're not falling out of compliance. So there's a lot more benefit to configuration management than just getting the day-to-day changes migrated.
Um, Tom, would you like to refer to that? What you see from customer side? We've seen a lot of requests for migration lately, from FedRAMP moderate to FedRAMP high from many agencies. Um, any comments on that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually working these days. I'm working with one of my customers, one of the organizations that I work. We work on such a migration, and we decided that instead of going through a massive one-step migration and to migrate everything, we take a granular migration, we call it. So we promote application one by one, and not just the application, but all the related entities with it. So all the application, and then the specific user, a group that's related to it, the core policies or security settings. We take everything related to this application and all the related entities, and we promote them to production, or promote or migrate them to the other environment that we need. And we're doing that, but we always need to remember that we have the power to roll back to the last known healthy state, right? So we're doing that, we're checking, we verify that we do it and we'll get the expected results, but we do it with safety that we can always roll back to the previous state.
Safety nets, Drew. We've witnessed these changes now within. What drives these changes and the requirement to move between different levels of FedRAMP, for example, and how organizations are looking at it from a project perspective?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are driving it. Like traditionally we looked at confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and those risks. So the higher the system is in like data categorization, and there's some misdocumentation around those that drive it. So if a system needs more availability, then like something approaching 5 nines, it's definitely going to be higher, and you're going to need more. Also, I mean, the in confidentiality is going to be huge. Like if that data, if that system gets popped and that data is released, like what is the impact of it on both the users of the system, on any of the people that both on like the people that access the system, but also anybody whose data is inside of it. So, you know, the federal government holds all sorts of sensitive information from your tax records to many times people get healthcare from the Department of Veterans Affairs or through the military, Social Security, like many of the things that make you like many of the things that make you unique as a human are stored in some sort of government system. And not to scare you, but you want the government to have that information so that you don't have to be constantly asked. But at the same time, we have a very legal and sacred burden to ensure that that stuff that is secure. So that is why usually you're going to see, oh, for this particular use case, FedRAMP low or FedRAMP moderate was necessary. But as we move up, as the use cases become more complex and have a greater impact, if there is a system compromise, then you're going to see them at those higher levels.
So while all the agencies are aligning now to a common high-level regulation and controls, we had a discussion earlier a couple of months ago around some new controls and regulations coming both from data protection aspects, but specifically on identity and access management. You mentioned the latest SP 863. Since you were so in deep in the weeds, I'd love to have your take on that.
Yeah, so 863, it is the third version of identity, and I was managing systems operationally through each of those. Actually, through the third one, when it came out, I was in a policy role. As we were working between those, you're taking those frameworks for identity and you're looking at field implementation. So you're marrying that because oftentimes, you know, that like your agency is selecting, and we talked about, you know, like moderate and high, they're selecting their risk tolerance. Like there's some areas where they take risk and there's some areas where they don't. And you want to have assurance that those standards are met. But what oftentimes happens, unfortunately, both in the government industry and all these places, when you ask for more assurance, a lot of times that means that it's manual. And it becomes a very arduous process to generate data, you know, and also, you know, like we live in a real-time environment now where if you're checking those assurance with those standards months ago or a year ago, like they're out of date. So you need like it's amazing. You need things faster, you need them less overhead, and you need them to be like more precise. And so simplifying that compliance through evidence is something that, you know, the configuration management done the right way absolutely helps this. And if it's not done right, you just end up with old dated paperwork that isn't really doing much, but it's just burning time and key resources. So with 600, 863, this new version, they really looks like they're getting it right as far as like proving who they are and the identity. And then, you know, like they're hopefully we'll see in this next year or two how those business lines in the field are implementing them.
So moving from more documentary to a more operational and security system, that's great. Maybe we can use this point in order to ask our audience, how would providing evidence or to NIST or other compliance regulations, how lengthy are these processes, and how much manual effort do they possess or interfere with their day-to-day operation? That would be nice to see how they take it. And in the meantime, maybe Barry, can you make it more tangible for me? Like what are types of challenges regulations possess, and what does it mean in the field for those administrators?
Yeah, there's two controls. If we're talking NIST, if we're looking at like 853, a couple controls come to mind around configuration management. You've got CM3 and CM9. CM3 is going to cover the governance around configuration management, the what configurations are controlled, what decisions must be made, how the process is audited, things like defining that an access policy requires change control, is where changing a user job title does not, who must approve these changes, and what's the process for documenting the change. And then you get into CM9, which covers the process for implementing the change, defining the roles, the responsibilities, the configuration management processes, identifying configuration items throughout the system development lifecycle, those kind of things. And while those controls, touching, building off what Drew said, while those controls don't explicitly require automation, doing them manually can require a large amount of resources, and they scale really poorly in large organizations. So automating these processes not only reduces that overhead, but it reduces the risk of things like human error.
Tom?
Yeah, and yeah, sure. So I can translate that to what I see in the field, and what described here around the audits is what my team calls audit season panic, right? And we see it all the time. So we see that during the audit, or in the time that audit rolls around, we see organization pull their engineers to hunt through like all change ticket or email change or Slack threads just to prove or just to show evidence or to the auditor and prove or show who approved this change like 6 months ago. Right, so it goes through a lot of labor, a lot of time is wasting here, and all the time that we burn here, it doesn't actually, or it actually it adds nothing to our security posture today. It just look at history. So we believe that instead of wasting time on that, we believe that the right way to go is through continuous tracking. We continuously track and keep all evidence for all the changes. And once the audit season comes, you don't need to panic. You just need to show the evidence from the system.
So basically, you're saying the same as Drew. Let's be prepared in advance. Let's do configuration management in an ordinary way. Everything will be much easier once you need to be audited. And so let's discuss around how practically configuration management and change management should be done. We see common ways which organization traditionally used to do configuration management, and I'm leaning on to Drew. We're talking about large organizations, even very large organizations. So configuration management can't be like a manual thing for sure. Traditional CI/CD tools often are insufficient today due to the fact that so many systems are actually writing in real time to the identity and access management system. Barry, can you give a little bit on how it's done today and how should it be done along as we see that the amount of systems and actors within the IAM system is just growing?
Yeah, sure. So there's really three approaches that we see out in the field from a high level. You've got manual promotion, the traditional way of an administrator manually promoting the changes. You see CI/CD tools or other development automation tools, and you see specialized identity configuration management tools. A lot of organizations look at CI/CD tools, especially if they're using them internally for development. They look very attractive. However, when you get into the world of identity, they have some drawbacks. The major one is the line between, say, configuration data and identity data gets really blurry in identity systems. In a traditional application, you might have the application code lives in the repository and the application data lives in the database. That's not necessarily the case with identity. Those will cross over. So with that kind of blurry line there, we see some real challenges with the CI/CD tools. To give you an example, if you've got an application configuration in a Git repository somewhere that's supposed to be promoted to the identity management system, right? And there are groups that it depends on. What's the relationship there for those groups? Are they stored in the repository? What about the user memberships? What about policies tied to that? Are you going to maintain all or some of that in code? Are you going to, how do you manage when the policy needs to change quickly if it's stored in a repository like that? So as attractive as the CI/CD tools can be for this use case, they have some serious challenges to being effective.
So, yeah, please.
Yeah, exactly. I would like to second Barry here. And what I see in the field is that organization cannot actually use the traditional CI/CD anymore. When we're talking about software development, so we see that it's more heavy process and scheduled process, but with identities, changes constantly happens, right? And we cannot freeze, we cannot stop the environment from happening, we cannot stop the changes from happening. And to do that, we have to go through two steps, as we said. The first one, to have a sandbox environment where we can try and test and break and revert and go back, and always be able to go back to the healthy state. And once we get to the results that we want, we promote that to production. And again, very important to remember that in any point of time, even after you promote it to production, you can roll back to the healthy or last known healthy state.
Amazing. So we're coming a bit to more practical aspects of how to do that, and how technical teams are actually can deliver continuous configuration management or change management flows, which also help to reduce the risk in introducing them into the environment, but also reduce the manual work required when required audits around that. Maybe we'll jump to the strategic hurdle here when we're trying to do some major configuration changes in the environment. Like we've discussed, some migration tools, for example, or system architectural system changes, job architecting, new role architecting in the environment, which can be very cumbersome. I think, Drew, you mentioned the one of the risks is the human factor here, because often different people build the environment, different people operate the environment, different people change the environment. So maybe elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges of government in that we feel, through acquisitions and because we put so much risk on our contractors to deliver the solutions, that you can just plug and play. And like they may have like a 30 or 60 or 90-day turnover, but if you've been developing an environment, maintaining it for 5 years, you can't just write down all the nuances of the configuration and how you got there. And both Tom and Barry have talked about like where those risks come from. And sometimes you're like searching for information inside of Slack channels. And, like a lot of those ancillary systems that you use to work for operational, those aren't changing over. You're not handing over your instance of Slack or Teams. Like all that context is lost. So then the new teams come in with very little context.
And that can be a great problem, misalignments, even sometimes misunderstanding of commands coming from different groups of the organization.
Absolutely.
So Barry, a bit with your experience working with large teams and complicated infrastructures, can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, on the challenges or the practical implementations.
Yeah, whatever make it more clear that configuration management is a critical portion of the system.
Yeah, so I think we touched a little bit on some of the challenges when you get into the more complex things like migration, right? Migrations are going to have a ton of moving parts, and it can be tough to replicate all of the complex relationships and those kind of things over. Ensuring parity across large complex projects, right? Or migrations, system upgrades, those kind of things. So making sure that all of this.
And maybe around the risk and how to mitigate the risk of creating new configuration changes and making sure that business continuity is always available.
Yeah, so I see some key disciplines that really contribute to this. In addition to actually building processes that match the organization's needs, some of the common disciplines that we see that help reduce these risks are going to be things like sandbox seeding, right? Closing that configuration drift, like we talked about earlier, having a dev or test environments that closely match production. If you're just testing the pieces that are getting changed, right? All of those potential risks from related dependencies changing won't be visible during testing that. Automating the promotion, right? That has significant benefits. In addition to just streamlining it, it's going to create consistency. It's going to reduce human error. All of the audit governance and compliance are going to be baked into those automated processes. And a little bit, kind of like Tom mentioned, accurate rollback is also a key part of reducing that risk. You've got to have a good way to go back to a good known point in time when the changes do go sideways, when they do go wrong. So being able to do that quickly and efficiently and not have to, scrounge through notes and everything to figure out how the way the system was before the change, all of those practices add up and really help reduce a lot of that risk to configuration changes.
Maybe, Tom, you can elaborate more on the ability to roll back a change. And I do see a difference between a small misconfiguration and a huge tenant disaster that might have caused during a migration or something like that.
Mm-hmm. So during a migration, again, let's talk about what happens if things go sideways, right? If things doesn't go well. So when things don't go well, you can always revert back to the healthy place, right? So this is the first thing that you need to do. Just a couple of clicks, and you're getting back to normal. When everybody's keep working and get back to normal. Then on the sandbox, you can test it. You can verify that everything works as expected. You can check what went wrong and why it went wrong. And again, only once you have the expected results, you can do it again on production safely and calmly when you know that you have the safety net that you can always get back to a healthy place.
We're coming into the end of this webinar. Started from more strategic risks coming both from operational and cyber resilience, and a bit to more practical tools like common automation existing in tools like Acsense for managing configuration management and ability to protect the data in case of something went wrong, and ability to roll back. So the path to resilience, if maybe each of you can kind of draw his own vision on and how organizations should act and where they should put their maybe tomorrow morning their efforts in order to make sure that it went best way. Who wants to start?
So I think two things that waking up tomorrow, I would really work on strategic visibility. Like a lack of discipline is going to hide those risks in transitions. And we've all talked about it, all the things that have to be done to reduce that attack surface, but it's growing now. But like, if you are hiding those risks in these transitions, whether it's from system to system, contractor to contractor, person to person, you're leaving yourself extremely vulnerable. And then the second thing is it's just never, going to be fast enough. And you're going to wake up every morning feeling, I don't know, slower or that everybody else is racing past you, but you've just got to accelerate those transitions. And, like standardized disciplines have to move faster. You got to go for lower risk, consolidation, and automation, and it is just going to get faster and faster in each of those. So that's what I would wake up tomorrow, and then that's why I'm very glad I'm in this position, Muli, that I am, because I get advised and I don't have to wake up worrying about it.
To the IP hell morning. Barry, Tom.
Yeah, I think the
Yeah.
most important thing that I said here, or that I think is most important thing to remember, is the shared responsibility model. That that the vendor is responsible for the cloud environment to be up and running, but you are responsible for the configuration and everything in it. So you need to feel safe to do that. You need to feel safe to keep running and changing and constantly work and adjust to the new reality, right? So for these reasons, you have to have an exact replica of your production environment so you can play and script and try and don't worry about that. And once you promote to production, feel safe that you can always get back to a normal situation. So if something breaks, just revert to a normal situation, let everyone keep working safely. Test it on your sandbox and then try again.
Barry, what's your call to action?
Yeah, I think probably the best next step, every organization or agency is going to be at a little bit different place and have different processes be more or less mature. So I think it's really important to start with taking stock of where you're at, do an assessment, understand, what areas you're strong in and what areas there's a lot of room for improvement. Like we talked about, are your non-production environments, how closely do they match production? If they're far off, that might be an area where you want to focus on versus if you've kept them pretty consistent, maybe there are other aspects, maybe some automation that might be a quicker path to get you, down the path of really having good change control, change management discipline. So yeah, really just taking a good look at things and assessing where you're at, I think would be a good first step.
So maybe to pass the torch to Sean, Sean, how can we help together our clients and viewers to have a better Monday morning?
Yeah, thanks, Muley. Yeah, to Barry's point, so the Acsense folks are offering a complimentary configuration scan against your current security framework. And if you'd like to take them up on that, please feel free to coordinate with me. We'll have a slide with all of my contact info, and I'll be available for whatever method you'd like to choose.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. And we did have a few Q&A questions if we had time to go over some of those. But the first one is, what are some ways agencies track changes to their IAM systems so audits require less manual work?
That's a good one. I think Tom touched on this a little bit, so he may want to elaborate a little bit more. But that's the thing is, as you're looking at things like configuration management and IAM resilience and all the ways that you can get that data, all these actions that are happening in your IAM system tracked. Keeping that tracked and having ways to compare that against your known benchmarks, your known frameworks, your known compliance controls, so that you're continuously keeping tabs on that. You're not waiting for, as Tom called it, the audit season fire drill. So I'll let you dive a little bit more on that, Tom.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So using configuration management, right? You need when you have two environments that are exactly similar, we said that we try and you work on the sandbox environment, and all the promotion to production are audited. We keep auditing for everything. So we keep all the changes, what changed, who took this change. Moreover, we can say that our process is that we need another set of eyes to approve the change before they actually submit it to production. So we're not only setting the environment and verify that it works, but we let another person check it as well. Now, when we do that, so the third party need to approve it, and the system in Acsense verify that we don't override the guardrails, right? So we stay in our guardrails, we stay in the policy, and that everything is still compliant and still audited.
Thank you, Tom. And then we have two more. First one is, how can we keep policy consistent during migrations between IAM tenants?
Yeah, I can kick that one off. So this is something that we see a lot with Acsense. As you're using tools to ingest all of the changes that happen in the IAM system, comparing those against framework, and you're doing migrations, it's important to, one, be able to migrate those configurations over to new tenants. Say if you have like a golden copy tenant, be able to clone that over to other new tenants you're setting up with your security baselines already configured. And then as soon as you get that tenant onboarded, going and monitoring those changes, making sure that as you're doing the migration and you're making updates, that those stay consistent with your compliance requirements and your policy requirements.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Barry.
So we
Oh,
call it
sorry.
compliance and assurance. So we set a set of guardrails, the policies that are relevant to our environment, and we set it on one environment, on our environment. And then once we migrate an additional environment into ours, the same set of rules applies to this object and to this a tenant that we migrate as well, right? So once we set the set of rules that are relevant to our environment, we apply them across all the systems, across all the objects, all the tenants that are relevant to us.
Thank you so much, Tom and Barry. And the last question from the audience is, how do you manage rollback when deploying changes? Is that automated?
Yeah, I think it's key, as we touched on, to have uh, a good resilience and recovery system for your identity systems, right? It's very hard to rebuild some of those things from scratch. Going through documentation, those kind of things. So if you've got a system that's designed to roll back changes to a specific point in time, whether those changes were part of your configuration management process, they were accidental changes, perhaps by an AI agent, or even malicious changes. If you've got uh, that resiliency and you've got multiple copies, it's not just living in a Git repository somewhere, but you've got actual multiple copies, you've got an immutable offline copy, you can always take your state back to right before the change happened and get back to business when the change, whether it was intentional or not, throws things off course.
Perfect. Thank you, Barry. And thank you all for joining us today. And a special thank you to all of our speakers for sharing their insights and expertise. We hope this webinar has been informative and valuable for you and your organization. If you have any questions or would like more information, please feel free to reach out to Sean Amadick, whose contact information is currently displayed on your screen.